The Alpha King did not stop moving because of the soldiers. He did not stop because of the cold mountain air pressing against his armor, or because of the creak of pine trees bending low in the early morning wind. He stopped because of two children. They were standing at the edge of a clearing, watching his scouts the way young wolves watch a fire. Not afraid of it, but old enough to know it could burn them. Xander Kallias had not survived 15 years of war, conspiracy, and crown politics by being a man who ignored the things that made his instincts go completely still. And right now, every single one of his instincts had gone still. The boy stood slightly in front of the girl, one arm stretched behind him, holding her back. His chin was up. His shoulders were square. There was something almost offensively calm about the way he held himself, like he had already decided he was not afraid, and was waiting for the rest of his body to agree. The girl stood behind him with her arms folded, and her dark curls catching the morning light. She was not hiding. She was studying. Her silver eyes moved from scout to scout with a kind of quiet precision that made grown soldiers shift on their feet. Silver eyes, the same shade as glacier water at noon, the same shade as the eyes Xander saw every single morning in the mirror. His jaw tightened. He had a birthmark under his left ear. A small crescent-shaped mark his mother used to press her thumb against when she thought he was being stubborn, which was most of his childhood. It was the kind of mark that appeared in his bloodline and nowhere else. His grandfather had it. His father had it. He had it. The boy had it. Right there, under his left ear. Faint as a whisper, but absolutely impossible to mistake. Roderick, his sharpest tracker, had already gone very quiet beside him. That was never a good sign. Roderick only went quiet when he had figured something out, and was trying to decide whether saying it out loud would get him killed. Alpha, Roderick said carefully. Those children, I see them. Their eyes are. I see them, Roderick. A woman stepped out of the cabin door then, and the world seemed to realign around her. She moved like someone who had spent years learning exactly how much space she was allowed to take up. Her dark wavy hair was pulled loosely behind her shoulders. Her hands were calloused. Her dress was patched at the hem and too thin for the elevation they were standing at. Her cheekbones were sharp, her face weathered by altitude and hard seasons. And she was still the most striking woman Xander had laid eyes on since the night he lost everything. She positioned herself in front of the children without hesitation. Her arms came out at her sides like barriers. Her chin lifted. Her eyes found him, not his scouts, not Roderick, him, and they did not flinch. Xander's chest did something complicated, because he knew those eyes. 8 years had passed since the night she disappeared from his territory without a trace. 8 years since his search parties came back empty. 8 years since the official records she had wandered north and simply never returned. 8 years since someone had taken her from him and made sure he never found out the truth. He was staring at Chloe, and Chloe was staring back at him with the flat, dry fury of a woman who had spent nearly a decade being left alive just barely, and had decided she would not spend one more second pretending that was something she was grateful for. Behind her, 2 children with silver eyes and his birthmark watched him with a wariness that broke something open inside him. The Alpha King of the Northern Packs, the man who had won wars and buried betrayals, stood in a mountain clearing at dawn and felt, for the first time in years, completely undone. Hey, quick question. How are you feeling right now? Thank you so much for being here. It genuinely means the world to me, more than I can say in a single breath. Stories like this one exist because people like you show up and stay. So, if you're already feeling something, if that hook just grabbed you somewhere you weren't expecting, please hit that subscribe button for us right now. smash the like and drop a comment telling us where you're watching from. It helps more than you know. Every single comment, every like, every subscription tells us that what we are doing matters, and that is the only reason we keep going. All right. Thank you. Now let's get back to the story. The cabin sat at the edge of a mountain nobody had named yet. At least, nobody Chloe had ever met. She had found it 8 years ago. Door hanging open, wind moving freely through the single room like it owned the place. A family of foxes had nested in what used to be a mattress. The root cellar had held 3 shelves of jarred preserves so old the lids had rusted, completely shut. She had pried them open with a flat stone and eaten pickled beets with her fingers, crying so hard the salt from her tears mixed into the vinegar. She had been 19 years old, 5 months pregnant, and so frightened that her hands shook even while she chewed. That had been her first meal in 4 days. She did not let herself think about that anymore. The Chloe who had sat on that root cellar floor, terrified and heartbroken, and convinced she was going to die in the mountains, was someone she recognized, but no longer lived inside. She had replaced that version of herself the same way she had replaced the cabin's rotting floorboards. One piece at a time, slowly, with whatever she could find. Now it was morning, and morning meant work. She pulled on her elk-hide boots, stitched by hand, seams lumpy and imperfect in the way that things made out of necessity rather than skill always are, and stepped outside into air so cold it caught in the back of her throat like metal. The creek was 200 steps down the slope. She had counted them so many times, she no longer had to think about it. Her feet knew the path. They knew the exposed root near the 3rd pine that could catch a toe in the dark, the flat stone that turned slick after rain, the hollow where the deer bedded down on nights when the temperature dropped below freezing. She carried 2 clay jugs, one under each arm, and walked the groove she had worn into the mountain over 8 years of the same journey. That path was hers. In a life where almost nothing belonged to her, that worn earth felt like something close to ownership. The twins were still asleep when she returned. Moon, her son, slept with his fists loosely curled at his sides, his dark hair pushed flat against one cheek. He would wake up with an opinion about something. He always did. At 7 years old, Moon had the particular confidence of a child who had never once been told that his thoughts were unimportant, and Chloe had made sure of that deliberately. The world was going to push back at him hard enough. She refused to be the first thing that did. Twinkle, her daughter, slept with one eye not quite closed. A habit Chloe had nearly frightened herself over when it first appeared. She had spent 3 nights watching her daughter sleep before she understood that Twinkle was simply too curious about the world to fully surrender to unconsciousness. Even in sleep, she was paying attention. Chloe stood in the doorway and looked at them for a long moment. 8 years ago, the elders of the Ashwood pack had dragged her to the northern boundary and cut the pack bond with a ritual knife across her left forearm. They had told her the children she was carrying were cursed, that they would bring ruin to the territory, that the signs were clear in the old texts, that she was doing everyone a kindness by leaving. They had not phrased it as a choice. The scar on her forearm had healed into a pale ridge that ached when the weather changed, which in these mountains meant it ached most days. She had stopped noticing it the same way she had stopped noticing the loneliness. Not because either of them had gone away, but because surviving something long enough eventually taught your body to treat it as ordinary. What she had never once treated as ordinary were Moon and Twinkle. They were extraordinary, and she had spent every year of their lives making sure they knew it. Moon could track animals through 2 inches of fresh snow at the age of 5. Not because Chloe had a methodology for teaching tracking. She did not. but because she had pointed at a fox print once and said, "See how it falls. The back foot lands in the same spot as the front." And Moon had looked at her with silver eyes gone wide and said, "It's like reading, but with dirt." He had been tracking ever since. Twinkle had a different gift. She noticed things that were wrong before she could articulate why. She would stop in the middle of a meal and say, "Something is different in the East Forest," and 2 hours later Chloe would find a pine split by lightning or a creek path that had shifted overnight. Once, at 4 years old, she had pressed her small palm against Chloe's knee, and the dull ache Chloe had been carrying in her joint for a week simply faded. Chloe had not told Twinkle what happened. She had written it in the margin of an old herbal guide she had found in the cabin. Something different in these children. Something that doesn't have a name yet. She had not written, "I am afraid of what that will mean when the world finds out." But she had thought it. Every single day, the morning routine was as steady as the mountains around them. Water, fire, breakfast. Dried berries, smoked fish when she had it, sometimes a root stew that Moon complained about, with a theatrical misery that made Twinkle laugh into her bowl. Then lessons. Chloe had no schoolhouse and no textbooks. She had the herbal guide, a battered almanac she had found wedged under the cabin's loose hearthstone, and 8 years of figuring things out the hard way. From the herbal guide, she taught the twins the names and uses of mountain plants. Not because she believed they would one day be healers, but because knowledge of what grows around you is the first step to never going hungry. "What does yarrow do?" she asked one morning, holding up a dried stem. "Stops bleeding," Moon said immediately. "And Troy says you can dry it for tea to break a fever." He paused. "Who is Troy?" "Someone I read about once," Chloe said. "In the margin notes?" "In a different book." Moon looked at her with the specific expression he wore when he knew she was not lying exactly, but was not telling the whole truth. She had no idea where he had learned that look. She suspected he had been born with it. "What does the blue nettle do?" Twinkle asked, reaching past her brother to touch a dried bundle hanging near the hearth. "Careful. The oils stay on the leaves even when they're dry." Chloe moved the bundle gently out of reach. "If you rub your eyes after touching it, you'll be miserable for an hour." "What does it do, though?" "In the right preparation, it reduces swelling in injured joints. In the wrong preparation, it does absolutely nothing except taste terrible." "How do you know which is which?" "Experience," Chloe said, "and one very unfortunate afternoon 3 winters ago." Twinkle filed that away with the silent efficiency she applied to everything. Moon immediately wanted to know about the unfortunate afternoon in detail. Chloe did not elaborate. These were her days, quietly enormous, quietly full, quietly hers. But in the back of her mind, under the routine and the small satisfactions, and the love that was the single most reliable thing in her life, she carried a sound that had never fully gone quiet. The last thing Elder Calvin had said to her on the night of her banishment. He had watched the ritual knife do its work, and then he had leaned close to her ear, his voice low and careful, like a man placing a stone on a grave. One day, he had said, "We will come back for those children." She had been 19. She had been 5 months pregnant and alone and terrified. She had not asked what it meant. 8 years later, she understood, and 8 years later, on the morning she would remember for the rest of her life, she stepped outside to check the lower trapline and found horses at the edge of the clearing. Soldiers, and a man at the front of them whose silver eyes she recognized the moment they found hers. Tripp had been tracking in the northern ranges for 11 years and had found exactly 2 things worth reporting in all that time. A collapsed mine shaft that turned out to contain the bones of a missing shepherd, and the wolf print patterns that indicated a pack boundary shift near the high glacier. This was the third thing. "Roderick," he said, crouching beside a fresh boot print in the mud near the creek. "How long have we been out here?" 4 days, Roderick said, without looking up from the set of smaller prints beside it. "And in 4 days, how many signs of habitation have we found?" "Including this?" 3. The snare lines, the water channel, and now these prints. "Right." Tripp stood up and put his hands on his hips. "So someone has been living up here, alone, for a long time, surviving." He looked at the surrounding mountains successfully. "There are 2 sets of small prints," Roderick said. He had not moved. He was still crouched over the mud, one hand hovering above the impressions without touching them. Similar size, both bare feet, both recent within the morning. Children. Yes. Tripp looked at the cabin visible through the tree line. Smoke from the chimney. A line of dried herbs hanging under the eave. A water channel carved into the slope with steady hands and careful thought. Someone had built a life here. "We should report back," Tripp said. "I agree." Roderick finally stood, and when he turned, his expression was the one Tripp privately called his "this is going to complicate everything" face. "Before we do, the smaller prints, the bare ones. What about them? Look at the depth distribution. The weight falls differently in the left print than the right. Slightly, but consistently." Tripp looked. He looked for longer than he usually needed to look at things. "Like a birthmark on the foot," he said finally. "Like a scar on the heel," Roderick said. "Very specific. Very consistent. I have seen one other person who walks with that exact weight distribution." There was a silence that sat between them like something heavy. "Roderick," Tripp said, "be very sure before you say what you're about to say." "The king," Roderick said, "his left heel. From the sparring injury 6 years ago. You've seen him walk." Tripp had seen the king walk. He had spent enough time in proximity to the king's footprints, in mud, in snow, in sand during the coastal campaigns, to know exactly what Roderick was describing. "There's a child up here," Tripp said slowly, "who walks like the Alpha King." "There are 2 children up here," Roderick corrected, "and I think we need to go back to camp and get the king himself before we knock on that door." Tripp ran both hands over his face, dragged them down, stared at the cabin. "He's going to lose his mind," he said. "Almost certainly," Roderick agreed. "And then he's going to blame us. We didn't do anything." "Roderick." Tripp turned to look at his partner. "We never do anything, and somehow we are always standing directly next to whatever is about to go wrong when it happens." Roderick considered this. "That's fair," he said. They went back to camp. Tripp delivered the report in the careful, measured tones of a man who had learned that the quality of news did not matter as much as the quality of its delivery. Xander listened without expression, which was always more unsettling than if he had reacted. "Show me," he said. That was all. 2 words. "Show me." And then the king was on his horse and moving north, and Tripp was riding beside him, thinking about all the ways this morning could go wrong, and mentally reviewing his escape routes. Chloe did not run. This was a choice she made in the half-second between seeing the horses emerge from the trees and the moment her brain caught up with what her eyes were reporting. Running said afraid. Running said guilty. Running said that she believed the world was still the way it had been 8 years ago, when she had walked out of the Ashwood territory bleeding and pregnant and alone. She was not that woman. She put herself in front of the cabin door, and she stood there. The children appeared behind her almost immediately. Moon first, because Moon was constitutionally incapable of staying out of situations that seemed important. And Twinkle just behind him, quieter, one hand resting at the back of her brother's shoulder. "Inside," Chloe said without turning. "No," Moon said pleasantly. "Moon, there are 6 of them and 1 of you," he said. If there are more of us out here, it changes the math. She turned just enough to look at her 7-year-old son, who was doing math on a standoff with the king's personal scouting party. We are not changing any math, she said. We are going inside. Look at the one in the front, Twinkle said quietly. Chloe turned back. The man at the front of the group had stopped his horse at the edge of the clearing. His soldiers had fanned out behind him in the particular formation of people who have been trained to stop looking like a threat, while absolutely remaining one. His cloak was black, lined at the shoulders with winter fur. The emblem on his armor was a wolf under a crown, stitched in gold thread so precise it had to be the work of a craftsman who did nothing else. He was looking at her. Chloe's body recognized him before her mind did. A cold, deep recognition that started somewhere in her sternum and moved outward, the way a crack moves through ice before the surface breaks. She had spent 8 years teaching herself to stop dreaming about him. She had done a reasonable job of it. Xander Kallias dismounted. He walked toward her with the slow, deliberate steadiness of a man who had decided that moving quickly right now would be a mistake. His eyes moved from her face to the children behind her, and then back. And something happened in his expression that he was not entirely successful in controlling. He stopped about 10 feet away. "Chloe," he said. His voice was low. It did not sound like a king. It sounded like a man standing next to something he had given up finding. "You're trespassing," she said. A short silence. "This is the king's territory," the one called Roderick said, from behind Xander's right shoulder. "This is my mountain," Chloe said, without looking at Roderick. "No deed and no army change the fact that I have been the only person maintaining it for 8 years. Tripp made a sound that might have been smothered laughter. Xander shot him a look. Tripp's face returned to neutral with impressive speed. "I'm not here to argue territory," Xander said. His eyes had gone to Moon again. They stayed there for a moment, long enough that Moon tilted his head and stared back with the precise expression of someone who has been told that staring is rude and has decided to do it anyway. "Who is your children's father?" Xander asked. His voice was steady. His hands were not. "Irrelevant," Chloe said. "Chloe, you want to talk?" She crossed her arms. "Then talk. But my answer to that question is none of your business, and that is not going to change." Xander was quiet for a moment that stretched tighter than bowstring. "The boy has my eyes," he said. "My birthmark, and Roderick tells me he walks like me. The girl." His voice caught. He cleared it. "The girl has the Kallias jaw and my mother's ears." "Your mother's ears," Chloe repeated flatly. "She passed away 8 years ago. I used to sit across from her at dinner and—" He stopped. His jaw worked. "Chloe, were you pregnant when you left my territory?" "I didn't leave," she said. "That is not what happened, and you know it." Something moved across his face, fast and raw and entirely unguarded. It was there for only a second before the king's expression settled back over it, but Chloe had seen it. Confusion, she thought. Real confusion, the kind you cannot perform. "What do you mean?" he asked. "Tell me what you mean." Behind her, Moon tugged gently at the back of her dress. "Mama," he said quietly. "He doesn't know." Chloe looked at her son. Twinkle looked at the king. "He doesn't know," Twinkle confirmed, in the tone she used to state facts that were simply observable. "He is not lying. He is frightened." "You cannot read a stranger's emotions," Chloe said. "I can," Twinkle said simply. "I have always been able to. You know that." Chloe was quiet for 5 full seconds. 8 years of survival. 8 years of trusting only herself. 8 years of building something solid out of the ruins of everything that had been taken from her. She looked at Xander. "You should probably come inside," she said. "But you come alone. Your men stay out here." Xander turned to his scouts without hesitation. "Wait here, my king!" Roderick started. She asked me to come alone, Xander said. So, I will come alone. She has spent 8 years keeping these children alive in these mountains. I think she can be trusted not to do anything to me in her own kitchen. Tripp leaned toward Roderick. Did he just compliment her by questioning our competence? Yes, Roderick said. Somehow I respect that more than I should. The inside of the cabin was exactly what Xander should have expected, and nothing he was prepared for. It was small but precise. Every object had a place. The herbs hanging from the ceiling were labeled in a careful hand, some in the common script he recognized, some in the older notation system used by mountain healers. The shelves held provisions organized by type and access. What was needed, daily within reach, what was seasonal, stored higher. There was a row of smooth stones near the hearth that Moon immediately explained were for warming and placing under the sleeping firs on the coldest nights, which Twinkle interrupted to clarify had been her idea, which Moon disputed. Xander sat on a 3-legged stool that Chloe indicated with a brief gesture. He sat very carefully, because the stool looked like it had been built by someone who was learning carpentry while they built it. Moon made that, Twinkle told him, noticing his caution. He was 6. It's fine, it won't fall. It wobbles on the left side, Moon said without any particular embarrassment. I know. I was going to fix it, but then I forgot. He forgot for 8 months, Twinkle added. It still works, Moon said. Xander looked at the stool, then at Moon, then at the stool again. Something complicated happened in his expression, something that was trying very hard to be neutral, and was not succeeding. Moon, Chloe said, tea, please. I know, Moon said, and moved to the hearth without being told twice, which meant he wanted to stay in the room. Chloe sat across from Xander. She folded her hands on the table. She looked at him the way she had learned to look at things in the mountains. Straight on, without blinking, giving nothing away. Tell me what you were told, she said. Xander's jaw worked. That you wandered into the northern ranges, that you had been struggling with the pack bond loss, which I knew nothing about. I need you to understand that, because I did not authorize. Who told you I wandered? Chloe asked. Elder Calvin. He brought the report personally. The kitchen went quiet. Moon set a clay cup in front of Xander with the careful precision of someone who has been taught that things worth doing are worth doing properly. He set one in front of his mother. He did not ask if the king wanted tea. He had already made the decision. Calvin, Chloe said. He was head of your pack council. He was the one who gave the exile order, she said. He held the knife himself. Xander went completely still. He told me. He stopped. Started again. He came to me 6 weeks after you disappeared. He said you had been found near the northern boundary. He said you had been confused, erratic, he said. You walked out on your own, and the pack bond dissolution must have been a misunderstanding. He used the word misunderstanding, Chloe said. Yes. She looked at the scar on her forearm, the pale ridge that ached on cold days. There was no misunderstanding, she said. He held the knife. He said the words. 7 elders witnessed it. 3 pack council members. It was the most official thing that has ever happened to me. Xander put his hands flat on the table. His voice, when it came, was very quiet and very even in the way that very quiet, very even voices get when something is being forcibly held in place behind them. How many months pregnant were you? 5. And you didn't. He stopped, reformulated. I didn't know, Chloe. I want you to understand that I would have. What? She said. What would you have done? It was not an accusation. It was a genuine question, and they both knew it. What would a young, newly crowned Alpha King have done 8 years ago, when a political conspiracy told him a woman had simply walked away? He did not answer. Moon, Chloe said, still looking at Xander, take your sister outside for a while, but Moon. Her voice was gentle but absolute. I need to talk to him alone. You can ask every question you have when I call you back in. I promise. Moon looked at Xander for a long moment. If you make my mother cry, he said, I will be very disappointed in you. Tripp's voice drifted through the cabin wall from outside. Did the 7-year-old just? Yes, said Roderick. Good kid, Tripp said. The door closed behind Moon and Twinkle, and for the first time in 8 years, Chloe was alone in a room with the man whose children she had raised on a mountain, because someone else decided she should disappear. She told him everything. The exile, Calvin's words at the boundary, the winter she almost did not survive, the one where the temperature dropped so fast, the creek froze in 4 hours, and she spent 3 days burning the dead trapper's furniture to keep herself and her unborn children warm. The birth, terrifying, alone, the way Moon came out, already furious with the world, and Twinkle came out, utterly silent, until Chloe pressed her to her chest, and the small girl made a sound like a question. She told him about learning to trap, learning to preserve, learning to stitch wounds and set a sprained ankle, and identify which routes were safe and which ones would put you horizontal for a week. She told him about the winter Moon got a chest fever, and she sat awake for 5 days running elderflower steam and changing cold compresses and bargaining privately with whatever was listening because she could not lose him. She did not cry. She had not cried in front of another person in 8 years, and she was not going to start now. Xander listened without interrupting, without moving, without the well-practiced kingly expression that kept the world at a manageable distance. He just listened. When she finished, the tea was cold. I'm going to find out who else knew, he said, and every single one of them is going to answer for it. I know you believe that, Chloe said. Right now, I need you to understand something more important. What? My children do not know who their father is, they have asked. I told them their father was a good man who didn't know they existed. That was the truth. He looked at her. I need to know, she said, before this goes any further, whether you actually intend to be in their lives. Not as a king, not as an obligation, as their father. Because if the answer is no, or maybe, or it depends on the politics, then I need you to get back on your horse and ride south, and we will continue, exactly as we have been. Chloe, I mean it. They have never known what it feels like to have something taken away. I built this life on purpose. If you walk into it and then leave, you will cause a damage I cannot fix, and I will not forgive you for it. Xander looked at his hands. I have a son, he said quietly, who built a stool and forgot to fix it for 8 months and is completely unbothered by that. I have a daughter who reads people's emotions like weather patterns. He paused. I have missed 7 years of their lives because someone lied to me, and I was not smart enough, or stubborn enough, to keep looking past what I was told. He looked up. I am not leaving, but I am going to need you to tell me how to be what they need, because I have no idea what I'm doing, and I would rather admit that now than make every mistake possible and figure it out that way. There was a long pause. That, Chloe said, is the first honest thing any man has said to me in 8 years. I can manage honest, he said. Most other things are going to be a learning process. She looked at him for a moment, then she stood and went to the door. Moon, she called. Twinkle, come back in. The door opened almost immediately. Moon had clearly been standing directly behind it. You were listening, Chloe said. The wall is not very thick, Moon said. Moon. I heard the parts that mattered, he said. He looked past his mother to Xander. You're our father. It was not a question. Xander stood from the 3-legged stool. He crouched down to eye level with both children, which Chloe noted and filed away, because most powerful men did not think to do that. He looked at Moon and then at Twinkle, and whatever was on his face at that moment was not kingly at all. "Yes," he said. Moon considered this. "Okay," he said, with the particular calm of someone who has already processed a situation more thoroughly than the adults around him have managed. "Do you know how to fish?" "I do." "Good. The creek has been uncooperative and Mama says the problem is technique. She won't admit that. I'm telling you directly." "Moon," Chloe said. "He needed to know," Moon said. Twinkle stepped forward and put her small hand on Xander's arm. She looked at him with those silver eyes, and whatever she was feeling from him, whatever she read in that quiet, impossible way of hers, seemed to satisfy her. "You can stay," she told him. "But if you hurt her, Moon will be very disappointed, and so will I, and my disappointment lasts longer." From outside, Tripp's voice again. "I genuinely love these children." "You are not supposed to be listening," Roderick told him. "I know," Tripp said. And yet, the first day that Xander spent on the mountain was the most humbling experience of his adult life, and he had once had to publicly apologize to the Coastal Pack Assembly while wearing ceremonial armor in 90-degree heat. Moon taught him how the snare lines worked. This involved a 40-minute explanation that included demonstrations with sticks, a brief lecture on the behavior patterns of the local hare population, a pointed observation that the king was holding the trigger mechanism wrong, and a moment where Moon took it back from him with gentle patience and showed him again, slowly, the way a skilled teacher corrects a struggling student. Xander was fairly confident. He had negotiated 3 international treaties with less difficulty. "You're thinking too hard about it," Moon said. "Traps work because the animal is following its habits. You just have to understand its habits better than it does." "Reasonable," Xander said. "Are you a good king?" Xander blinked. "I try to be. Do you know your people's habits? I study them. Patterns of trade, seasonal needs, what drives conflict." "Same thing," Moon said. He set the snare. "Then you already know how to trap. You just haven't done it with wood and wire before." Xander looked at his 7-year-old son. "Where did you get that?" he asked. "Get what?" "That particular way of thinking." Moon considered. "Mama says most things are the same problem, wearing different clothes. So I always look for what a new problem has in common with a problem I already solved." He checked the snare tension. "She taught me that." Xander filed that away. Twinkle's contribution to the day was different. She sat with him near the creek, while Moon went to check the upper lines with Roderick, who had somehow ended up recruited into snare inspection and seemed faintly alarmed by this. "Does it hurt?" Twinkle asked. "What?" "Whatever you've been carrying. It looks heavy." She was looking at the water, not him. He was quiet for a moment. "Yes." "Guilt? Some. Anger. Mostly. At the people who." "At yourself too," she said. He looked at her. "Yes, that's good," she said. "Anger at other people is easy to hold forever. Anger at yourself usually wants to turn into something else." "Into what?" "Better choices," she said simply. She picked up a flat stone and skipped it. It went 4 times. "Mama is not going to make this easy for you. I don't expect her to. She trusts slowly. She tests without telling you she's testing." "I know. She already likes you more than she wants to," Twinkle said. Xander was quiet. "I can feel it," she said. "I'm not saying it to make you feel better. I'm saying it because it will probably make her more difficult for a while. She doesn't like feeling things she didn't decide to feel." "That's fair," Xander said. "She's very fair," Twinkle agreed, "even when she's being stubborn." "Usually when she's being stubborn, actually." She handed him a flat stone. He skipped it 2 times. "We can work on that," she said. Across the clearing, Tripp had somehow ended up helping Chloe split firewood. This was not something anyone had planned. Tripp had offered, Chloe had refused, Tripp had picked up the axe anyway. And Chloe had decided this was either a battle worth fighting or it was not, and gone back to what she was doing. They worked in silence for a while. "How long have you served him?" Chloe asked. 9 years. Joined the scouting division the year after his coronation. And in 9 years, is this the strangest thing you've been sent to find? Tripp considered. Third strangest. But the other 2 didn't involve children who make me feel like I need to improve myself as a person. Chloe looked at him. That's Moon. He told me I was holding the snare trigger wrong, Tripp said, with the same energy a tutor uses with a student who should know better. I haven't been spoken to like that since my training days. I didn't expect to appreciate it as much as I did. Chloe looked away, but the corner of her mouth moved. He's like that with everyone, she said. Twinkle's different. Twinkle is quiet in the way that deep water is quiet, Chloe said. She sees everything. I noticed. Tripp split a log. They're remarkable. I know, Chloe said. That's why I've been terrified since the day they were born. She said it simply, without drama, the way people say true things they have lived with long enough, that the saying of them is just part of the landscape. The elders called them cursed, she said. I knew the moment I held them that the only thing they were was powerful. And powerful things make afraid people dangerous. The elders were afraid. The elders were afraid, she agreed, and someone else pointed that fear at me like a weapon. She did not say Calvin's name, but she thought it. In the capital, 300 miles south, in a comfortable study lined with old books and older justifications, Calvin would have absolutely no idea that this morning had happened. He was about to find out. The journey south took 4 days. Chloe had not agreed to it easily. She had agreed to it after a conversation with Xander that lasted until well past midnight, a conversation that involved a map, 3 separate lists she made on birch bark with a charcoal stick, and an agreement with terms so specific that Tripp, who heard the outline the next morning, said it was the most thorough negotiation he had witnessed in a decade of watching the king do actual politics. The terms, briefly. Moon and Twinkle would have private quarters. They would not be presented to the court until Chloe decided they were ready. Xander would not use their existence as a political tool. Chloe would have full freedom to leave if she chose, with no consequence. She knew she was trusting him more than the evidence currently warranted. She knew it, and she did it anyway, which felt like the most dangerous thing she had done in 8 years. The capital city, Varenholm, revealed itself at the end of the 2nd day through a break in the mountain passes. A sprawl of grey stone and banners, towers climbing against a sky the color of cold steel. Chloe had been there once briefly, years ago. It had seemed enormous and hostile then. It still seemed enormous. Moon pressed against her side and stared. Big, he said. Yes. How many people? 40,000 in the city proper, Xander said, from her other side. Another 20 in the surrounding territories. Moon absorbed this the way he absorbed new information. Completely, and then immediately began asking questions about the distribution of resources across a population that size, which led to a conversation with Xander about granary systems that lasted through the city gates and into the castle courtyard, and ended with Moon making 2 corrections to something Xander said about eastern supply routes that Xander, to his credit, acknowledged without argument. He's 7, Chloe said quietly to Xander. I know. The supply route correction was accurate, wasn't it? Distressingly so, Xander said. He got it from a pattern, though, not prior knowledge. He was extrapolating from what he'd seen in the mountain supply lines. His method is correct, even if he couldn't have known the specific numbers. Chloe watched her son walk ahead of them, head swiveling, taking in everything. He's going to be an interesting adult, she said. He's going to be an extraordinary one. Xander said. They settled into the east wing, private, away from the main court traffic, exactly as agreed. Mara, the palace healer, appeared the first morning with a frankness Chloe found immediately comfortable. "I'm going to examine both children," Mara said, setting down her bag. "Not because I was asked to by anyone in authority. Because I am a healer, and there are 2 children who have been living at high altitude with limited access to proper nutrition for 7 years, and I have opinions about that." "You're welcome to try," Chloe said. "Twinkle will cooperate. Moon will ask questions you don't expect." "I have been a healer for 30 years, Mara said. "I have never met a child question I couldn't handle." 20 minutes later, "Is this your actual opinion, or is this the standard recommendation?" Moon asked, holding a small vial of iron supplement up to the light. "My actual opinion," Mara said. "Because sometimes people give standard recommendations and call them opinions to make them seem more reliable." "Moon," Chloe said from the corner. "It's a fair point," Mara said. She looked at the boy. "This is both. It's the standard recommendation, and it is my specific opinion for your specific case, which I have just assessed. The supplement is the same one I would give any child at your altitude. The dose is adjusted for your weight and the specific deficiency I can see in your nail color." Moon looked at his nails, looked at the vial. "Okay," he said, and drank it without further debate. Mara looked at Chloe. "You were right," she said. "I know," Chloe said. But while Moon was asking questions, and Twinkle was quietly observing everything, Xander was in a room 2 floors above them, having a very different kind of conversation. He had summoned Brandon, his head of intelligence, within an hour of returning to Varenholm. Brandon was the kind of man who seemed to exist specifically to deliver information other people did not want to hear. He was small, precise, and impossible to rattle, which made him excellent at his job and slightly exhausting as a human being. "Calvin," Xander said, without preamble. "I anticipated this subject," Brandon said. "I have been anticipating it since Roderick's report arrived this morning." "What do you know?" "Less than I intend to know by morning. More than you currently know." He set a thin folder on the desk. The exile 8 years ago was documented. Officially, as a voluntary departure following pack bond complications, the paperwork exists. Calvin's signature, 3 council members. And the pregnancy, no record. Xander looked at him. "Deliberately absent?" Xander asked. "Almost certainly," Brandon said. "A pregnancy at that stage could not have been invisible in the pack bond records." Someone removed the notation. Who had access to those records? At the time, 3 people. Calvin, the pack archivast, who died 4 years ago, and the council elder Faye. Xander was quiet for a moment. "Faye is still on the council," he said. "Yes. Begin there," Xander said. "Quietly. I don't want this in the open until I know the shape of it." "There's one more thing," Brandon said. "There always is. The ancient archives contain a prophecy, predating the current pack structure by at least 400 years. It describes twin wolves born to an omega of particular resonance during a political, the text is old, the translation is approximate, during a political fracture in the Northern Territories." Xander stared at him. "The twins. The description is not inexact," Brandon said. "It mentions silver eyes. Dual inheritance of ability, leadership in one, healing in the other. And something the translator rendered as, they come at the breaking point of the old order, and they survive it." "Calvin knew about this," Xander said. "I believe he did," Brandon said, "and I believe he considered it a threat rather than a promise." Chloe found out about the prophecy on a Tuesday from Mara in the Palace Herb Garden, which was the strangest place she had ever received catastrophic information. But also, she thought, one of the better ones, because the garden smelled like rosemary and the benches were warm from the afternoon sun. "Troy left notes," Mara said, handing her a folded piece of paper. "He's the kingdom's herbalist, the old kind, the kind who studies the old texts alongside the plants. He found the prophecy translation years ago. He told me about it because he thought it was interesting academically." Chloe read. She read aloud. "Silver-eyed twins born of a separated bond, carrying half-light and half-strength. Half-light is what the old Pax called healing ability," Mara said. "The resonance that knits rather than commands. The translator thinks the text means one inherits the capacity to lead and the other inherits the capacity to heal." "Moon and Twinkle," Chloe said. "The text doesn't name them, no, but it describes them." She kept reading. Her jaw tightened. The text read, "They come at the breaking. They survive what the old order cannot." "The political fracture," Mara said. "There is a territorial dispute in the northeast. Has been building for 2 years. Calvin's faction, the Conservative Council, the Old Guard, they have been positioning themselves to challenge Xander's authority. If it becomes a formal challenge, it splits the northern Pax. Civil war is not an impossibility." "And Calvin thought the twins were going to survive it," Chloe said. "Meaning the old order wouldn't. I think he thought he was protecting the old order from them." "He was protecting his own power," Chloe said, "from children who hadn't even been born yet." She folded the paper. 8 years on a mountain, 8 years of dried berries and clay water jugs, and a scar on her arm that ached in the cold, because an old man had read a 400-year-old text and decided that the best thing to do about it was make sure the twins' mother disappeared. She sat with this for a moment. Then she asked, "Where is Troy? I would like to speak with him directly." Troy was exactly as eccentric as Mara had warned. A lean, grey-haired man with ink permanently stained into his right index finger who talked about plants the way other people talked about old friends. He appeared to live in his workroom, which smelled like 7 things simultaneously, and contained 3 distinct ongoing experiments that he periodically turned to check during their conversation. "The blue nettle oil," he said, noticing where Twinkle's eyes had gone the moment she followed Chloe into the room. "You're identifying it by smell?" "By color," Twinkle said. "And yes, by smell a little. 7 years old? Almost 8. He looked at Chloe. "You've been teaching her." "We had a herbal guide," Chloe said. "And I started paying attention." "The guide from the mountain cabin," Troy said. He paused. "I know that guide. I wrote the margin notes." The room went quiet. "You wrote, 'I used to research in the northern ranges,'" he said, 20 years ago. Before I came to the capital. I left that cabin's guide behind when I moved south." He looked at Chloe steadily. "You learned herb work from my margin notes." "Every reliable piece I know," Chloe said. He sat down heavily. "Then I'm sorry," he said, "for every time the note was unclear. And I am deeply grateful," he added, looking at both children, "that it was useful." Twinkle walked to the workbench and stood beside him. "The blue nettle," she said. "In the right preparation. What ratio of water?" Troy looked at her for a long moment. "For joint reduction, 1 part oil to 8 parts heated water." He paused. "How did you know there was a ratio problem?" "Mama said in the right preparation with a specific tone," Twinkle said. "She uses that tone when she knows the right answer and is waiting to see if someone else does too." Troy looked at Chloe. "She's going to be extraordinary," he said. "I know," Chloe said. "That's why we need to make sure the right people know about the prophecy before the wrong people use it." The assassination attempt happened on a Wednesday. In hindsight, Chloe thought, Wednesday was an aggressively ordinary day for something like that. It had the energy of a Monday threat that had procrastinated. She was in the East Wing corridor with the children. returning from a morning session in Troy's workroom, when Twinkle stopped walking. This was significant because Twinkle never stopped walking mid-corridor without reason. She stopped the way water stops. Something solid in the path. "Something is wrong near the east courtyard," Twinkle said. "How wrong?" Chloe asked. "Wrong like the night the creek froze in 4 hours," Twinkle said. "Fast, hidden." Chloe turned. Trip. Trip materialized from the corner. He had been 3 steps behind them all morning, invisible in the particular way of experienced scouts who have decided to be unobtrusive. "King is in the east courtyard," she said. Now, Trip moved. What followed was 17 minutes that Chloe subsequently could not fully account for in sequence. Trip's warning shout, the sound of a struggle from the direction of the garden gate. Moon pulling Twinkle against the wall with the fast, deliberate movement of a child who had been taught since age 4 that when a threat appears, you reduce your profile and wait. What she could account for was what Twinkle did. The wouldn't-be assassin. A man she would later learn was named Clara's husband, recruited by Calvin's faction in an act of desperation after Brandon's intelligence gathering had gotten closer to the truth than they had expected, had made it past 2 guards, and was 20 feet from Xander in the garden before Trip's shout stopped him. In the struggle that followed, Xander took a blade across the forearm. Not deep, not fatal, but a wound. Twinkle was at the garden gate before anyone thought to stop her. She pressed through the gap in the confusion and crossed the garden in 10 running steps and put both hands on Xander's arm before Mara, who appeared with breathtaking speed, could do anything. The bleeding slowed. Not in the way bleeding slows when pressure is applied. In the way bleeding slows when something inside decides to stop. Mara stood very still and watched. Twinkle lifted her hands. The wound was still there, but the blood had stopped, and the edges had closed slightly, more than they should have in that time. "I'm tired," Twinkle said, to nobody in particular. She swayed slightly. Xander caught her with his uninjured arm before she went down. He sat on the garden path with his daughter in his arms and looked at his forearm and looked at her and did not say anything for a moment that felt very long. "She shouldn't have done that," Chloe said, appearing at the garden gate, her voice tight. "No," Xander agreed. "She also just saved me from infection, probably, and a significant amount of pain. I'm going to have feelings about both of those things for a while." Twinkle opened one eye. "I'm okay," she said. "I just need to sit for a minute." "You're sitting," Xander said. "You can sit as long as you need." "She has never done that with another person before," Chloe said. She came into the garden and crouched beside them. Her hands found Twinkle's face, checking. "Twinkle, look at me." Twinkle looked at her. "I'm okay, Mama," she said. "I know you're okay. I need to see it." Twinkle let her look. She was patient about it in the way of children who understand that some things parents need to do are for the parent and not the child, and who have decided to allow this because they love the parent. Moon arrived last because Moon had apparently spent the intervening minutes tracking where the attacker had entered the property and finding the gate mechanism that had been tampered with. "Southeast gate latch," he reported, to the room at large. The bolt was reset with a false pin. It looked locked from outside, but wasn't. Whoever did it knew the gate. Xander looked at his son over Twinkle's head. "They knew the gate," Moon repeated to make sure it had landed. "I heard you," Xander said. "Brandon." Brandon appeared from somewhere. "Southeast gate," Xander said. "Who had access to the mechanism in the last 48 hours? "I have a list," Brandon said. "Of course you do," Tripp said, leaning against the garden wall and looking like a man who was reconsidering his life's choices. "I always have a list," Brandon said, with dignity. Clara appeared in the afternoon, escorted by Roderick, speaking like a woman who had been thinking very hard about something for several days, and had finally made a decision she was not comfortable with, but could not avoid. She had worked in the palace records for 11 years. She had been Faye's assistant before Faye's retirement. "I know what was removed from the records," she said, in Xander's study, looking at her hands. "I was not the one who removed it. I was told to pretend I hadn't noticed. I pretended for 8 years." She looked up. "I'm not pretending anymore," she said. The Great Assembly of the Northern Pax convened 3 weeks later. It was supposed to be a hearing on the territorial dispute. It became something else. Chloe had spent those 3 weeks in the strange, suspended experience of being inside the palace walls, while the world outside them rearranged itself. She had eaten food she had not trapped herself. She had slept in a bed that was not a pile of sleeping furs on a wooden frame she had built. She had watched Moon absorb the palace library like a dry field absorbs rain. Fast, total, leaving no evidence of what had been absent before. Twinkle had attached herself to Mara's workroom and was learning the formal names of everything she had known by sight and smell for years. "Did you know?" "Twinkle," said one evening, sitting across from Chloe in their quarters, "that the yarrow I used to dry for fever tea is actually the same plant. Troy uses in the joint preparation. Different parts. Different preparation, but the same plant." "I did know that," Chloe said. From the margin notes, Troy says most healers specialize too early and lose the connections between plants. He says the connections are often more important than the individual properties. What do you think? "I think I've always learned by connections," Twinkle said. "I notice what things have in common. That's how I always knew things were wrong before I could explain why. I could feel where the connections had broken." She looked at her mother. "Like the night you cried about the beets," she said. Chloe went very still. "I wasn't there," Twinkle said. "I know that. But sometimes I can feel things that happen to you. Old things. Not clearly, more like a shape of something. Twinkle. I'm not sad about it," she said. "I just want you to know that I understand more than I've said. About how hard it was. About how alone it was." She paused. "And that I'm glad you didn't stop." Chloe crossed the room and pulled her daughter against her and held on for a long moment. "I was never going to stop," she said. "I know," Twinkle said, her voice muffled against Chloe's shoulder. "That's why I'm glad." The assembly convened in the great hall. Calvin arrived with 9 council members and the particular confidence of a man who had controlled the narrative for 8 years and had no reason to believe this morning would be different from all the others. He saw Chloe before she saw him. She was standing at the front of the hall, to the right of Xander's position. Straight-backed, clear-eyed, wearing a deep green dress that Aurora, the palace's warmest and most capable of making people feel like they belonged somewhere, had pressed into her hands the night before with the quiet authority of someone who has decided a thing and will not debate it. Calvin's confidence did not evaporate, but it shifted. The assembly began with the territorial dispute, as scheduled. Calvin spoke first. He was very good at speaking, measured, reasonable, painting himself as a man of tradition and stability in uncertain times. He was midway through his opening position when Brandon set a folder on the central table. "Forgive the interruption," Brandon said, in the tone of a man who does not actually require forgiveness because he has done nothing wrong. "There are documents I need to enter into the assembly record before this proceeding continues." Calvin looked at the folder. "Those are internal records," he said. "They are," Brandon agreed. "Specifically, they are the pack bond records from 8 years ago, including the original notations regarding a pregnancy. Notations that were subsequently removed from the official archive and replaced with a Document recording a voluntary departure. The hall went still. I also have the testimony of Clara, Brandon continued, who witnessed the removal and was instructed to remain silent. I have the testimony of Faye, who I understand has had a difficult 3 weeks of conscience and has decided to speak. Faye, from the far end of the council table, did not look at Calvin. She looked at the folder. Additionally, Brandon said, I have the testimony of a third council member who was present at the exile and signed the documentation under what they describe as considerable pressure. Calvin stood. This is an attempt to derail. It is an attempt to complete, Xander said. His voice was quiet, in a room full of people that made it the loudest thing. You told me she wandered, he said. You told me the bond dissolution was a misunderstanding. You brought me a report that was a document full of lies dressed up in the language of concern, and I accepted it because you had served my father and I thought that meant something. Calvin's jaw tightened. The prophecy. The prophecy, Xander said, described what my children would do, not what they were. You looked at a text that said these twins would outlast the old order, and you decided that made them dangerous when any other reading would have found it hopeful. They are the end of everything this kingdom was built on. They are 7 years old, Xander said. They were born on a mountain in a cabin that belongs to a dead trapper because you were afraid of what a 400-year-old text might mean. He looked around the hall. My daughter healed a wound on my arm 3 weeks ago. My son found the tampered gate mechanisms before any of my guards did. They learned these things from their mother, alone, in the wilderness, because she raised them when no one else was willing to. He looked at Chloe. She looked back. This assembly will hear the full account, Xander said, and when it is finished, it will make its judgment, not based on old fears, not based on political convenience, based on what actually happened. What followed was 4 hours. Clara read her testimony. Faye read hers. The third council member, a quiet man named Jonah, who had clearly been Gringsis for 8 years, and was relieved to put it down, read his. Chloe spoke. She stood at the center of the hall, and she told the story she had told no one except Xander, in plain language, without performance, the way she did everything, directly, without looking away. There was a moment, partway through, when the room was so quiet she could hear the candles, and then Twinkle, who was supposed to be in the east wing with Mara, who had apparently made a decision, was standing at the hall door. She walked to her mother's side. Moon appeared 30 seconds behind her, having clearly been following her. We wanted to be here, Moon said to the room at large. Nobody told them to leave. Chloe looked at her children, 7 years old, silver-eyed, raised on a mountain, standing straight in a room full of the most powerful people in the Northern Territories. She took each of them by the hand. The assembly deliberated for 3 hours. Calvin was removed from the council pending formal trial. Faye received reduced consequence for cooperation. The 2 remaining conspirators faced full council judgment. The exile was officially declared unlawful. The record was corrected. Chloe stood in the hall afterward, in Aurora's green dress, and breathed. Xander came to stand beside her. The assembly wants to know, he said quietly, what restitution looks like. Tell them I don't want their restitution, she said. I want their guarantee. Guarantee of what? That the next Omega, who is afraid of powerful people, doesn't get put on a mountain. He was quiet for a moment. That's going to require changing the law. I know, she said. Get to work. From across the hall, Tripp murmured to Roderick. She just gave the king a policy assignment. I know, Roderick said. He looked pleased about it. I noticed. The weeks that followed had a different quality to them. Not easy. Chloe had not expected easy, and would have mistrusted it if it arrived, but honest. Clear, the kind of days that built something rather than simply passed. Moon discovered the Palace Libraries section on governance theory and spent 3 days cross-referencing it against the almanac Chloe had taught him with On the Mountain. He brought Xander a list of 7 observations, formatted as a simple document in his careful 7-year-old handwriting, which Xander read in full and responded to point by point. Seriously, because he was not a man who dismissed thoughtful work, simply because the person doing it was 7. This became a recurring thing. Twinkle spent mornings with Mara and afternoons with Troy. She was learning the formal language of what she already knew by feel, and the matching of word to instinct seemed to satisfy something in her that had been unaddressed. She told Chloe one evening that she had always known what things were, and not always known what they were called, and that, having both felt like a door that had been half open, finally swinging all the way. Like speaking a language you've been thinking in, Chloe said. Yes, Twinkle said, exactly like that. Chloe and Xander moved around each other the way people do when they are both aware that something is present and are not yet certain what to do about it. There were meals, conversations in the evenings when the children were asleep, a walk through the East Gardens where he showed her the trees that had been planted by his father, and she showed him that one of them had root rot that would take it down within 2 seasons, which she had identified from the color change in the bark, which he had completely missed, which he wrote down. You do that a lot, she said. Do what? Write things down when you're corrected. I was taught that dismissing a correction you can't argue with is the habit of small minds, he said. I have enough character flaws without adding that one. She looked at him. What character flaws? She asked. I am stubborn, he said. I occasionally assume that if I didn't know something, nobody did. I held on to the story of your disappearance for 8 years without questioning it hard enough, which is a failure of both intuition and accountability. You were 22, she said. You were a new king, and someone you trusted lied to you. I should have trusted my own instincts more than I trusted his documentation. Yes, she said. But that's something you learn by getting it wrong once. You won't get it wrong again. He looked at her. You're being generous, he said. I'm being accurate, she said. Generous would be pretending it didn't happen. Accurate is knowing what it was and deciding what to do with it. They were standing very close to each other by this point, the kind of closeness that doesn't happen by accident. Chloe, he said. Don't say something careful, she said. I've had enough of people being careful around me. Say what you're actually saying. He looked at her for a long moment. I love you, he said. I have loved you since before I understood what the absence of you was doing to me. I spent 8 years with a shape in my life I couldn't explain, and now I understand the shape and I want to know whether you will let me. She kissed him, not impulsively, not desperately, with the full, deliberate intention of a woman who had decided. He kissed her back with the same quality, certain, present, not a question. From somewhere significantly closer than was appropriate, Tripp said, quietly and with great satisfaction, "Took long enough." "We are standing in an open garden," Chloe said, into Xander's shoulder. "I am aware," Xander said, not moving. "Your scout is right there." "Tripp," Xander said calmly. "Leave." "Leaving," Tripp said. A pause. "Congratulations, my king." Tripp. Already gone. The sound of boots retreating at an unhurried pace. Moon found out at breakfast the next morning because Twinkle had felt the shift from 3 corridors away and told him at dawn. "Finally," Moon said, with the air of someone who had been waiting for a conclusion to arrive. "Moon," Chloe started. "I have been aware of the situation for at least a week," he said. Twinkle told me about the feelings thing, and I told her about the garden walks, and we both agreed you were getting there. You? We didn't interfere, he said. We just watched. That is not better, Chloe said. It's not worse, he said pleasantly. He looked at Xander. You're staying? Yes, Xander said. Good. Moon reached for the bread. Now can we talk about the supply route corrections I made to the Eastern Granary estimates? Because I think there's a larger issue in the distribution model that… Moon, Twinkle said. Yes, it's breakfast. It's also a significant logistical inefficiency. After breakfast, Moon considered this. Fine, he said, after breakfast. Isolde came to see Chloe in the 4th week. She was not what Chloe had expected. She was not imperious or unrepentant. She was tired, in the specific way of someone who has been carrying something heavy for a long time, and has finally decided to set it down regardless of the consequences. I did not know about the pregnancy, she said. I want to be clear about that. I was told the Omega had been that she had chosen to leave. I believed it because Calvin told me, and Calvin had been reliable for 20 years. You knew about the exile, Chloe said. Yes, I thought it was the council exercising legitimate authority about a concern I didn't fully understand. I told myself it was not my business. It was someone's life, Chloe said. Not angry, precise. Yes, Isolde said. It was, and I told myself it wasn't my business, and that is a choice I have to live with. She looked at her hands. I am not asking your forgiveness. I don't think I've earned the right to ask for it. What are you asking? To testify at Calvin's trial. Fully. Everything I know, including the things that make me look complicit. Chloe studied her. Then testify, she said. Not for me, for the record. Isolde nodded once. One more thing, Chloe said. The law change. I support it, Isolde said. I will use whatever influence I have left to advance it. Good, Chloe said. That was all. Not forgiveness. Not warmth. But something like the beginning of accountability, which Chloe thought was probably the only honest place to start. Calvin's trial lasted 2 days. The evidence was complete. The testimony was consistent. The council found in full against him. He was stripped of his title, removed from the pack structure, and exiled, formally, with documentation, to the Southern Territories. As he left the hall, he passed Chloe. She did not look away. She did not speak. She did not need to. The scar on her left forearm ached with the particular dull persistence of mountain weather, the way it always did in the cold stone corridors. She pressed her right thumb against it, briefly. Then she turned and walked back to her children. In the spring, Xander formally proposed the new protection law to the Assembly. The one Chloe had assigned to him in the hall the day of the Great Assembly. It passed. It prohibited the use of pack bond dissolution as a political tool, required documented consent, and created an independent oversight councils for any future exile proceedings. Chloe read the final text 3 times. It's good, she said. It's yours, Xander said. The shape of it came from what you told me. It's ours, she said. Everything that matters from here is ours. He took her hand. Moon and Twinkle were on the east garden wall. They had discovered they could climb it from the inside with the right foothold. Sequence and had spent 3 mornings testing this, which Chloe had allowed because outdoor physical activity and problem-solving were both things she believed in, and because the wall was wide enough to sit on safely, and because watching them sit side by side on top of a palace wall, eating the bread they had smuggled from breakfast, was one of the most genuinely happy things she had ever seen. They're going to rule something, eventually, Tripp said, appearing at Chloe's elbow in the way he had of materializing when the conversation seemed interesting. I know, Chloe said. You sound peaceful about it. I raised them to be ready, she said. That's all any parent can do. Moon spotted them from the wall. Mama, he called. Twinkle figured out how to skip a stone 9 times. You said 6 was the limit of the technique. No technique has a hard limit. Chloe called back. I said 6 was the limit of my technique. Moon processed this. Okay, he said. That's honest. Usually I am, she said. Twinkle waved from the wall, small and certain and entirely herself. Chloe waved back. She did not think of the cabin as a past anymore. She thought of it as the place where she had become who she was. The way the twins thought of the snare lines and the creek path and the grove of pines near the eastern slope. It was not a wound. It was an origin. She had survived things she should not have survived. She had built things from nothing. She had raised 2 extraordinary people on a mountain nobody had named, with a herbal guide and an almanac, and 8 years of figuring out what she was capable of. She knew now. She was capable of most things, and the ones she was not capable of alone, she had people for those now. Not because she had needed rescuing. Because she had decided, finally, that needing people was not the same as being weak. That was the thing the mountain had been trying to teach her from the beginning. She had just needed enough time to hear it. The cabin was still there. Chloe had asked, once, whether they should take it down. Rebuild the wood for something else. Let the mountain reclaim the clearing. Xander had not answered immediately. He had thought about it for a full day and then said, It's yours. Whatever you want to do with it is right. She decided to keep it. They went back in the first autumn. Chloe, Xander, Moon, Twinkle, Trip, who had not actually been invited, but had simply appeared at the horses and nobody had told him to leave. And Mara, who had decided she wanted to see the mountain plants in their native environment and had organized her own transportation. Troy could not make the journey on account of a back injury that he blamed on his workroom stool, but he sent a detailed list of plants he wanted samples of, organized by altitude and season, which Twinkle spent 2 days collecting with the focused energy of someone who has found the thing they are supposed to do. Moon walked the snare lines. He had left them set, a reflex from years of routine, and on the second morning he pulled a hair from the 3rd snare, on the upper slope, the one closest to the eastern grove, and brought it back to camp in the gray pre-dawn light, the same way he had done hundreds of times before. Xander was awake. He had gotten up early, the way he always did now, and was sitting at the old cabin table with tea that was too hot and a view of the mountains through the patched window. Moon set the hair on the table. Upper slope snare, he said. He looked around the cabin. It's smaller than I remembered. Things usually are, Xander said. The mountains aren't. Moon sat across from him. They're exactly the same. Some things stay the same. Which things? Moon asked. Xander considered. The things worth building on. Moon thought about this. Like foundations, he said. Like foundations. Chloe appeared in the doorway, her hair loose, her feet already in the elk-hide boots she had brought back out of. She was not entirely sure why. Habit. Affection. She saw Moon and Xander at the table. Something settled in her, the way a stone settles into the right place in a wall. Final. Necessary. Correct. Tea? She asked. Please, they said together. Twinkle appeared behind her, already carrying 2 more cups, having heard the request from 3 rooms, away with the particular attentiveness. That was simply how she moved through the world. The blue nettle is blooming on the east slope, she announced. Troy is going to be extremely pleased. Troy is going to want every sample we can carry, Chloe said. I know, Twinkle said, satisfied. I already started. Trip arrived from outside with firewood he had not been asked to collect, set it by the hearth, and accepted a cup of tea with the settled contentment of a man who has found his place and has no particular interest in leaving it. Nice morning, he said. Yes, Chloe said outside. The mountains stood exactly as they always had, enormous and patient and utterly indifferent to the small, warm light in the cabin window. Inside, a family drank tea in a cabin at the edge of the wilderness, and the world was, for this morning, exactly what it should have been all along.